Hello, uh, it's your host, Illuminastic. In this live stream tonight, I'm going to share with you guys some of my most powerful and interesting visions, as well as the most important lessons that I've learned from my experiences with ayahuasca, as well as what I interpret to be the general message of ayahuasca, or the experience of ayahuasca for the I don't know what to call it, for the collective. Uh, and I actually can boil this down. I was struggling thinking about this a little bit. Like, what exactly, if I had to distill, the message of ayahuasca to a single point, what would it be? And that's why I had to kind of divide it into two main categories. I think my personal greatest lesson, good evening, and the message that I think that is being presented to the collective. So for me personally, the greatest lesson that I have learned from ayahuasca is that I didn't know what love was. And of course, that is a pretty huge development in a person's life. And I can't attribute this entirely to ayahuasca. I have to give some credit to my partner, but I'm quite sure that it wouldn't have been possible without ayahuasca. I had a tremendous amount of emotional damage from my childhood. My mom was a good person, but she had severe damage. And I think by the time I was maybe 4 or 5, I wouldn't say I love you to her. I wouldn't kiss her. It's like I knew that I had to put up an emotional firewall. And I think once that wall went up between my mother and I, it was just there for the rest of my life. And it's not like I was a particularly cold and callous person, but my heart had never really been open. I was always generous, and I hated to see people suffering and all of that sort of stuff. But I definitely also had some, toxic psychology. And for many, many years, it was a struggle for me to have relationships. And that was another result of ayahuasca, is that I was with a girl that had narcissistic personality disorder, which is just absolutely a horrific thing to deal with. And one of the end results of ayahuasca for me was that I had no tolerance for the kind of toxic stuff that was coming from this person. So I'll explain a little bit about how this came to pass. And I think, actually, first, let's talk a little bit about the message to the collective. I've been really thinking a lot lately about how consciousness is a unified field. This is a theme that has been with me in my life since I was very, very young. This is an idea that I stumbled upon when I was in my pre-teens, probably. I mean, very, very young, I started reading Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna and Richard Evans Schultz and, Buddhist texts. And, it was, I guess it didn't occur to me how unusual it was at the time, but that's what I did with my time as a child, even. So I'd also, prior to ayahuasca, I'd had a lot of experiences of this, direct experiences of this collective mind, of being a part of that in a lot of different forms, both with entheogens or psychedelics and without. Experiences of telepathy and shared experiences with friends from hundreds of miles away. I've received all kinds of information, both during ceremony and not during ceremony, that was very, very specific and turned out to be true. And the value of that for me is not necessarily about developing ESP. It is about the fact that if you are told that we are all one and that we share this interconnected consciousness with all of life, and perhaps with even, an animate object, rocks, the Native Americans, some of the tribes in North America would say that, rocks have consciousness as well. It's just of a different order. And so direct experiences of this consciousness have this consistent effect on the people that experience it. They are generally harmless. They are, it's as if we're constrained to the will of the life force, and the collective becomes just as important as the individual self, which is this disposition, I guess, is the antidote to the atom bomb, right? I mean, and I think also that the integrated consciousness, which is what I think happens when people, advanced meditators or people that have experienced ayahuasca or DMT or even psilocybin, the fields, as Dennis McKenna thinks, are filters in the nervous system or in the consciousness that screen out, what is it? We see like 1% of the full spectrum of light. It seems that there's good evidence that we actually don't perceive most of what's there. And so these experiences allow us to bring down these filters temporarily. And I think different plant medicines and different entheogens bring down different filters to different degrees for varying amounts of time. So there are different purposes and different lessons to be gained from all of them. And so this experience of integrated consciousness is different than just being taught, because it's like a direct experience. It's knowledge, it's gnosis. And not only that, but these compounds cause physical changes in the brain that are positive, enhanced neuroplasticity, enhanced neurogenesis. So while you're having these revelations, while you're taking in these experiences, they have more of a lasting impact than they would otherwise, because the brain is more malleable, basically, and is able to write new programs very, very rapidly. And so that is the value of these experiences for me. And one of the other reasons I'm sort of elucidating on that is that all of these lessons that I'll share from ayahuasca didn't really necessarily come from the ayahuasca experiences, but usually they were integrated with something that would happen right before or right after the ceremony, or both. And I haven't really decided if these kind of experiences of this sort of interconnectedness, like an enhanced degree of interconnectedness, like synchronicity and these sort of precognitions and these sort of experiences that whether they're happening all the time and we're just not aware of them, I think that's probably the case, or if they are actually increased around contact with these entheogenic substances. Daniel Pinchbeck referred to it as a DMT hangover, which, or an occult hangover after DMT, which I thought that was a pretty good way to describe it, although maybe a little bit negative connotation. So with my partner and I had just finished, I think, 3 days of ayahuasca, and it was a few days later, and I went into a coffee shop to get, I guess, some water and a vegan sandwich or something, because I was on the dieta. And when I saw my partner, instantly this voice that I associated with Pachamama, the plant spirit that people associate with ayahuasca, she said, "She will have your babies." And I just thought that's absolutely insane. I didn't really believe it, I guess. And I can actually hear our son crying upstairs. She's trying to put him to sleep now. So there's a lot of details that we won't get too deeply into, but we kept just running into each other, and it was like we were old friends, and I had no like romantic impulse. I just instinctively, I felt like she was struggling with something, and she was, and I just wanted to help. I really didn't have an agenda or anything. And so a few weeks later, she came to a series of ayahuasca ceremonies with me. And during one of them, we were just found ourselves holding hands, and the feeling just of being in her presence. I was still absolutely convinced that this was not going to develop into anything, of just pure, overwhelming, unconditional, no strings attached. Like I just was in awe of her, and I only cared about her happiness, and it was just so overwhelming and pure. Obviously, it's changed my life dramatically. This single experience of just finally having the courage and the capacity to receive and to feel that kind of pure, unconditional love. Pretty amazing. That's interesting, Jonathan Chapin. You know what else is interesting? That's the first time I've seen that last name, which is actually my father's last name. He was estranged from me when I was a small child. I wonder if we're related. Do you know where the name comes from? Actually, I've always, is it Scottish or? Okay, so that's not exactly how it all happened, though. There were a lot of other developments, and so the way that ayahuasca, I think, usually works, it's not the first time. It's very common for people to have like a mostly physical experience, which was the case with me. I drank 2 or 3 cups. I had no visions. I just got sick. I think it was a little bit of like, DMT weirdness for 20 minutes or something. And I was actually really disappointed because I had started reading about studying ayahuasca, and I was like, I don't know, 10 or something. And I'd always just been fascinated with the Amazon. And so it was kind of like a dud firework almost or something, but I did notice that my body, just as soon as the liquid went in, it just started to tingle, and it was like, thank God, it's about time, So somebody referred a different shaman, a Schwar trained Czech guy that I still, at this point, I've drank with Kofan and Saraguru and Schwar, and the Czech guy is still my favorite. And that might just be because he was with me through, the suicide of my mother and the situation with my partner developing. He was like present through all of this crazy stuff. Scottish and Cherokee. Yeah. My grandmother was Blackfeet. Supposedly she was the first Native American woman to play Carnegie Hall, but she died before I ever met my grandfather. And so anyways, where were we? Okay, yeah. So you have to peel all these layers like an onion, and I had a lot of physical issues. And so in the beginning, it was mostly just physical. And this happened like 2 or 3 times. Every time I drank, it would get a little bit stronger and a little bit weirder. And I remember by like the 4th time or something was the first time that I was like wanting to ask for charcoal or something, like, just turn it off. I didn't, but I was freezing cold, and I didn't know that that's just because of vasoconstriction. I was worried that I might be dying or something. And these like yellow glowing like tendril things were, the visions were usually in this sort of screen that I could look away from, but this time they started coming out, and that I didn't like that. I remember not liking that at all. And so I kept drinking and drinking and drinking, and I think it really wasn't until like the 6th or 7th time, maybe the first time, that I went out to the jungle, because we were actually just having these ceremonies in town here in Vilcabamba. It had all just been this like crazy nonsensical weirdness, and it's not that it wasn't powerful, and I could tell that I was healing. I felt better than I had in years, and there were positive developments, but everything was super incoherent and just ridiculous. And so we go out to the jungle. Yeah, I'll share this one with you guys. This is pretty insane, and it covers a lot of bases. We go out to the jungle, and I had drank, and I was laying on the deck listening to all the animals, and the medicine was becoming strong, and but I wasn't really having any visions yet or anything. And this was the first time I experienced this, but definitely not the last. I felt like I had to vomit, so I stood up and bent over the rail, and is more like this cough, and there was like this foam, like white, bubbly, it didn't make any sense. It almost had like coherence, like almost like cotton sticks together, not quite, but it just made no sense. It was like, what the hell is that? And so I coughed up 2 or 3 of those things, and Pachamama tells me you need to go into the jungle. And I was thinking, I'm tripping on ayahuasca. It's dark and it's the fucking Amazon rainforest. I'm not just going to go walk into the jungle in the middle, that's just, you just don't do that. And so she said, no. It's just, there's a little opening right inside the forest. You don't have to like go way crazy deep or anything. You just go out into the forest in this little clearing, just like 30 feet, but you just need to go in there. And I was really hesitant, but I was like, okay, I need to do whatever she says. And so we had been fasting. I don't know if I mentioned that. I think at this point for a couple of days. Actually, the Shuar tradition is that you will drink and then you hike through the jungle. And in case you've never been to the Amazon rainforest, it is not like, you're not like walking on hard packed, it's like 2 feet of mud everywhere. I stepped in actual quicksand at one point and like almost instantly sunk up to my hips, and we pulled myself up out of there and found ourselves in a datura forest, like these datura trees, the toei everywhere, just as far as you could see. And it was just crazy. So you arrive, you drink the night you arrive, and then you get up and then you walk and walk and walk. And it's mountainous too. So it was just so brutal. And we went to this gorgeous waterfall and then we come back and drink. And so this was the second night. The first night, I don't think was really that powerful. So I've been fasting though, and also exercising and barely drinking water even for, 2 days now. And so maybe 3 hours of sleep or something since the ceremony the first night. And I managed to walk down the steps and I realized that I'm going to vomit. And I'm sure most of you guys know this, but just in case, I'll explain. The idea is that you are able to actually vomit out negative energy traumas and stuff. And I'm an open-minded person, but you have to apply some scrutiny and skepticism before you're going to accept something that loony sounding, So I stop at this bush and I barf and 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 it had the consistency like this. It was weird. It's almost like, you ever bought that slime in the machines for like a quarter? And when it was, while it was happening too, I could see these black spots, kind of like oil spots almost. And I could see like what traumas they were. I could hear, my mom yelling at me, "You don't deserve ice cream," because she's really mad at herself because she can't even afford it. You know what I mean? Like and I realized that was an imprint that, I've carried and self-sabotaged in order to, like all this stuff, and you're processing it and you can actually feel yourself getting lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter as you're vomiting all of this stuff up. So that ends and I'm just like drained and and I said, "Where did you get that?" And she said, "The same place that I got this." Like twice as much. I mean, I swear it could have filled a 5-gallon bucket. It made no sense. I hadn't eaten anything, So, I mean, I'm sure the body, maybe because it's cleansing, because your fasting is generating this stuff. Maybe there's some other explanation, but it certainly does feel like you're actually expelling all these traumas. And the evidence to support that is that a lot of the tendencies that I had that were negative before these experiences actually were gone. And I know enough about psychology that I can, self-analyze enough to see the connection between the things I vomited up on that acacia tree or whatever and the changes in my personality. There's a correlation. And, there was a study I saw published this week. I mean, I don't think it's the first of its kind even, but it was talking about how, one single dose of ayahuasca causes changes in 2 major centers in the brain that facilitate higher cognition. And also, another study that a single dose, the therapeutic effects last for at least 6 months. And so people are noticing. Okay, so then I'm like, oh, wait, I'm still supposed to go to the jungle. And I'm thinking, man, I'm going to get bit by a snake, like all the bad things I've done. This is some kind of trick, you know, that I'm going to walk out there and they're going to just get bit in the neck by a viper or something. And I was trying to fight, and then suddenly I had to really go to the bathroom, like right now. And I was like, uh-oh. And I tried to like run over behind a bush and I couldn't go. And Pachamama's like, and I realized she's not going to let me use the bathroom unless I go into the jungle. She's got control of my guts right now. Obviously, that vomiting was ridiculous, you know, but I literally couldn't, like, even though I had to go so bad, I was afraid I wasn't going to make it. Once I got, 10 feet away out of the path or whatever, couldn't do it. And so I walk out into the jungle, and of course, she lets me go to the bathroom right away. And at first, I remember I looked at this log that had like all these, like, it looked like 400 different types of plants. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't quite that many, but, probably realistically like 70 species or something, lichens, mushrooms, there's beetles and all kinds of bugs all over it. And it hit me like when they bulldozed the rainforest, like this log was like that big around and like that long or something. And I was looking at it like, because I was thinking about sitting on it to try to have like a chair to use the bathroom. And I thought, there's no way I'm sitting on all that. It's all alive. And that was rough, looking at the forest floor and it's glowing. And it really is. I was right under a Noya tree, the tree of light, and the leaves. I didn't know what it was at the time, but there's leaves glowing everywhere. So I can see all the bugs moving around. So using the bath. Oh, but I forgot to mention something. When I was like, the snake's going to kill me, thinking that, Pachamama said to me, when was the last time a mosquito bit you? And I stopped and I was like, what the hell? Because nothing was biting me. And mosquitoes, I mean, I have mosquito netting, and it's like, it's got a layer, like an opaque fucking layer of mosquitoes that are trying to eat you. Right. And I'm like standing there, nothing's bothering me. And she's like, these are all my creatures. I wouldn't have brought you through all this just to kill you in the jungle. So I go out into the forest and I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do now? And she said, well, with every breath, let go of ego, let go of fear. If you feel any disturbance in your energy, you have to release it. And so, and find that stillness again and just stand here and breathe, and you'll see. And so I did it, and I was able to, I learned a lot about consciously managing our emotional state and our energetic state in this maybe 10 minutes. So that's another, bullet point lesson there. The ability to determine for myself how I feel and to not be subject to any external influences, even if I'm standing in the jungle tripping on ayahuasca at 2 a.m. or whatever, alone in the dark, right? So I start breathing and exhaling this. And as I become more and more calm and clear, all the animals in the jungle and bugs and everything are just coming to life, and they're getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And I had been out there to use the bathroom in that same area. And this was not normal. And when you're laying on the deck of this house, you're not really that far from where I was in the jungle. And so it definitely did seem that these responses from the jungle had a connection to the change in my energetic state. And when something did pass through me at this point, I would hear certain, an owl would respond to a certain type of thought, or, certain insects and different animals seem to have connection to, as if they were part of my being. That experience of integrated consciousness that I mentioned as the antidote to the atom bomb, right? So I got to experience, it's very difficult to explain, but it was as if I was the entire jungle, and every sound that came from any of the animals was connected to some event in my being. So after a little while of this, I go back up on the deck and I lay down, and still the visions are chaotic. And I say, I really wish that you would all of this nonsense visions all the time. I just don't understand what I'm supposed to do with this. What are we doing with these weird interdimensional movies that are just, at one point it was like a modern, ultra modern, like Japanese looking like trolley car going by for like 8 minutes or something, and like the scenery around it didn't really change. And I'm like, what is this? And she's like, okay, here's something you can use. And all of a sudden there's this like geisha alien lady sitting in front of me, and she makes this gesture from her heart. Well, actually, first, she's standing next to this other guy. I forgot about this. There's this other guy, and he's got like this big black exoskeleton, almost looks like a giant Darth Vader. And he walked with like godlike confidence, like just super slow around this wall. And then he starts dancing. And every now and then he would like do this extra little thing. And all of the cicadas or whatever they were in the trees every time would like, yay! And I'm like, okay, I still don't know what to do with this. What is this? Some kind of like cricket god or something? I mean, it's cool and I appreciate it, but I don't know what to do with this, And so she's like, okay, well, here's something you can use. And then the geisha lady is like right in front of me. And she kind of looks like a cross between a geisha and a gray alien. And so she makes this gesture from her heart, and these like green characters, definitely like Asian looking, but like alien level, just weird, crazy. And I said, what am I going to do with that? And she said, you're going to make music with it. And I would find out a few minutes later that she wasn't kidding. And so I still, though, was like, okay, I still don't get any of this. And she said, okay, here's something you can use. And so she gave me x-ray vision, basically, so that I could see into my guts. And I had been sick for a long time. And she said, remember when you were lost in the mountains in California for 4 days and you drank from those streams? You have parasites, and it's bad enough that it could kill you. And she said, I can flush the bugs, but I cannot kill the eggs. And that was nuts. So then I sit up, and I'm just sitting there for a while with my hand and over my face, and I just kind of lost in my own thoughts. And I started thinking about my partner now, because I was not sure how to deal with it or what to do with it. And I opened my eyes, and the shaman is sitting next to me, and he says, "The German girl." I was thinking maybe I should just ask her to tea, because it's not so it's casual. And that's what I was thinking when I opened my eyes, and the shaman says, "The German girl, ask her to tea, but by the river." And then he tells me, you are becoming a shaman. I've been watching you drink twice as much as my teacher and handle it fine. And you're helping all the people that his people are like a lot of Czech people that will come and drink with him a lot, like a few times a year. So he's known most of them for a long time. And, so he knows how much experience they've had. He's like, you're helping these people. This is like your sixth ceremony. These people have drank 50 times. And, and he's like, but you have to sing. And I mentioned that I hadn't been well. And I also am very self-conscious about singing. And when I would sing in rock bands, I would always drink a couple of beers or take a couple of hits of acid or something. I would never ever would have performed in a totally just normal state prior to this. And by the end of the night, I was always so tired that I wouldn't participate in the singing. Not because I was, for all the reasons that I just outlined. And he didn't like that at all. And he actually, one time I remember he said, "He who is not singing with us is singing against us." And I thought, well, that's a little intense, isn't it? So he eventually convinces me that I need to sing with him. And I also felt it was a great honor, but I was quiet for a while. He's beating his drum and he's singing, and I'm just kind of sitting there. And then all of a sudden I felt like muscles in diaphragm and in my throat that I didn't know existed or that I could move them prior to this. They just were like opening in all these weird ways so I could make all these sounds that I would never have conceived of coming out of a human being prior to this. And when it was over, the other people at the ceremony, passing the talking stick around later, were saying, you know, when you two were singing together, it was the most powerful experience of my entire life. And so that was tremendously powerful on a lot of levels. And I've mentioned the telepathy and ESP type experiences a couple times, and that was another. It actually happened on the way to the ceremony with the shaman. We were sitting next to each other on the bus, and I was thinking about this absurd thought when I saw my partner in that coffee shop that she would have my babies, and it had literally just passed through my head. And he looks at me and he says, "The first time I saw my partner, I knew that she would be having my babies." I'm like looking at this guy, you know, at this point in our relationship, actually, we'll do it pretty much consciously. You know, it's like a constant condition of our presence together, you know, it's sort of like fluid telepathy. Well, thank you, Zindra. By the way, you guys, if you haven't, please smash the like button, share these videos, subscribe. We are putting together some patron-only content, so if you are so inclined, you can support us on Patreon. So back to the, he says that before we even get there, but then that night when I'm going to sleep on the rails, I have my eyes closed and there's a mosquito and I see it coming and I'm like, wait a minute, my eyes are closed. And everything looked kind of orange. So I had this feeling I was looking through something, and I thought, okay, my brain could definitely piece all this together. Like I could see the rail of the deck and the mosquito, and I knew the mosquito was real because it landed on my forehead and bit me. And that's when I kind of like really, it was like, what in the hell is this about? So I started waving my hands in front of my face and doing everything I could do, short of actually trying to get up and walk down the deck or something, you know. So the next morning I walked down the stairs, and the first thing the shaman says to me is, "You can see through your forehead sometimes when you drink the medicine." Now, maybe I'm making something out of nothing, but that is some random shit to just randomly say to, you know, as he didn't even say like, "Hey, good morning. Would you like to snort some tobacco or whatever?" You know, it was just the first thing. Okay, so continuing on with the theme here. So a few more experiences, you know, we go back to Vilcabamba, where we live, and I still have some number of ceremonies to go before I would return to the States, and ultimately, obviously, I returned to Ecuador, but maybe 3 or 4 ceremonies later, I still had only experienced these like really cartoony, even when they were coherent. And I'll mention this, when I was complaining about the random nonsense visions, the trolley car, actually, Pachamama said, "The mind works in symbols. Just because you don't consciously understand what you're looking at does not mean that nothing meaningful is being transferred." And I was like, wow, that was a good answer. And I knew absolutely, like, she's definitely correct, you know. Okay, so everything had still been really cartoony. And as I was saying earlier, this is because of this onion peeling sort of process that ayahuasca does, where you go a little bit deeper. Sometimes maybe almost nothing happens. And then you're like, well, that was weird, you know, like 2 hours and barely any effect. And you can drink more and still nothing happens. You know, it's just how it is sometimes. And so at any rate, 8 or 9 in, and that started to change finally. I think also I had increased to maybe, I'd been drinking 2 cups at once for a while at this point. So I had this fascination with the Lucifer myth when for a long time. And it wasn't like I was attracted to anything dark, or it was just this thing, like the universe was always calling my attention to it. And I never really had totally resolved what it was about. And so Pachamama says, would you like me to explain that to you? And I said, yes. And she said, well, okay, so in the beginning, there was this consciousness, and it was sort of like nothing. And this is a story I'd heard from Jewish mysticism too. It's the same sort of idea. And so it divided, basically. First, it divided into two, and she actually gave me this vision of watching this consciousness energy divide into pieces until it became 13. And interesting thing about this is that these processes sort of happen outside of time. They're transtemporal. And so when I say the one divided, the one was still there somehow, counterintuitively, but it was also, it had 12 around it. And it's sort of like the zodiac or archetypes of consciousness. And when, like, I'm trying to think of it, like the trajectory of the ray determine the archetype of consciousness. And so we all are expressions of these archetypal forms of consciousness. And she said the Lucifer, Prometheus, there's all kinds of different names for it, but that is like your archetypal energy consciousness. And so that's what this fascination has been about. And that's kind of what I figured to an extent, but seeing this process happen was just absolutely an extraordinary experience. And then it got a little bit deeper. And this was the first time I had visions that were like real life, crystal clear, not cartoony. It was like I was looking into another dimension, and there were these two guys that had, they're like Egyptian staffs. I don't know the name. Like they go up and around, almost like a hook, and then it curls back. And there were two of them, and they had these staffs, and it was this, like, it was like the white light of creation, and they were sticking their staffs into the mass of this energy and pulling these. If you've ever taken psychedelics, you know what I'm talking about. There's like these films of like color that are sort of translucent, and it was that, and they were pulling it out and like creating universes. And so I watched that go on for quite some time. And so I'm trying to think if there's like any other really, really wild visions that I haven't done. I mean, I'm sure there is. We talked about the trolley car and the division of the one into, and I'm going to do more detailed videos probably specifically about like that vision of the energy dividing and the geometries and how that all went down. You guys probably know about the Fibonacci sequence and, the golden ratio and these type of things. But something I just learned the other night about Benford's law, it's really complicated thing to describe, and I almost regret bringing it up because now I'm kind of stuck. But it has to do with any set of numbers, basically. If you take the population of all 1,900 cities in the United States and you write them all down, you're going to have 30% of the numbers will begin with a 1, 17% will begin with a 2, and the percentages get smaller as we get down to the number 9. And this crazy thing about it is that it is present in everything. And apparently, like say, if you measure from the Earth to 100,000 galaxies, it doesn't matter whether you use a broomstick, miles, meters, inches, a dog's tail, whatever, it still works. And what I'm getting at with that is I feel like what Heisenberg said about how the first sip from the cup of natural scientists will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. I feel like it's the macrocosm, microcosm thing. the individual scientist like Oppenheimer, or Heisenberg, this might happen to him over his lifetime. And science as the macrocosm, it takes decades instead of, or, centuries, I guess, instead of decades for the discipline to have the same experience that the individual scientist might have. I hope that made sense. And I think that things like Binford's Law are very close to being proof that there is some sort of consciousness that has guided and determined the processes of creation. It's not quite God in the way that a lot of Western people think, but it is more than just blind materialism. And when I alluded earlier that I would address the message of ayahuasca to the collective, I think that whether it's DMT or ayahuasca or even really high doses of San Pedro, it is very difficult to have these experiences, and the experiences that accompany them after your consciousness has been changed, and still have a strictly materialistic point of view. In fact, I've seen a nihilist take a single dose of DMT, and when he came back, I said, so what do you think now? And he said, we are pure consciousness and we are eternal. So, and this is something I've seen now countless times. Somebody's worldview, just one single contact with one of these entheogenic plants, and just like that, I've seen it in people, the older you get, the more solidified the neuropathways, the neuronets in your brain have become. So the older you are, the less likely you are to just suddenly just say, like, wait a minute, I don't think that blind evolution is the whole story, which is something that I've seen somebody do a 180 on. So collectively, that is what is needed from these plants. This is the most important thing that the medicine is showing to us. And I know from decades of observation and experience that people that experience this unified field of consciousness, that are able to, through whatever means, suspend the absurdly narrow vantage point of their single ego in order to experience the holistic consciousness that really constitutes the universe. These people are not going to go to war. They're not going to steal. Also, my experience is that as you attenuate to your higher purpose and you learn to live in accordance with its principles and follow your highest path, the universe supports you in ways that I still am shocked after experiencing this for a couple of decades now routinely. It gets rid of the fear-based existence that we are conditioned to believe in. And I think that that's part of the reason why people that have become conscious to this degree are peaceful and helpful and reasonable. And I would also suggest that the reason that this consciousness, that psychedelics were suppressed in the 60s, and the influence of mainstream culture around the world really is so shallow and material, the powers that be, and I know this for sure from my experiences in the lodges, they know that these states of consciousness create a type of individual that does not need to be governed and will not tolerate being governed, that they will be made to be totally obsolete. And I really do think that that is the next evolutionary step, and that the chaostrophe that we are experiencing around the world at the moment is actually sort of like birthing pains. There are certain laws of the universe that you cannot get around. And one of them is that opposites create each other. That's going to be part 2 of my last patron-only secret live stream this Sunday. That's going to be the subject. We're going to go way into the problem of duality. But one of the expressions of that is this order out of chaos. And so if we're going to see a new world coalesce, a new order, there's guaranteed to be some chaos that gives rise to this new order. That's a very difficult question. The question is, would you say that it is dangerous to brew your own ayahuasca and drink it without an experienced shaman? It depends. It depends on who you are. Would it have been dangerous for me? Probably not. I had a tremendous amount of experience with, and also different disciplines like meditation and whatnot, along with a boatload of entheogenic experience. So it depends on the person. I would at least have someone present if you absolutely cannot have a shaman. So, like I said, that's a difficult question to answer. I think that there's definitely a lot of benefit, but I would also say that ayahuasca has become an industry, and sometimes I do feel like certain opinions that are popular are actually rooted more in pop culture myth than reality. And I would just be very cautious, I mean, if you have to, I wouldn't do it alone, but you can also always take, a little bit and wait a few hours and just be cautious and ramp up a little bit. Oh yeah, well, Jonathan, what I was saying about the third eye and be able to see through your forehead, it turns out it has rods and cones, and it is connected to I can't recall the visual cortex. So yeah, I mean, it's just ayahuasca literally activates your third eye to the extent that sometimes you can literally see through your fucking forehead. It's a real thing. I know it is, let's see what else. Well, deja vu could be any number of things. Somebody that had a very advanced understanding of neuroscience told me that they think that it could be just a signal getting processed twice in the brain. It could be that the universe, once all of the light consumes itself, it collapses back into the singularity, explodes, and starts all over again with the exact same conditions, and we just live this life over and 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 over, and we remember it sometimes. I don't know, The main difference between LSD and ayahuasca. Okay. LSD, I can take it and perform a show. Also, LSD seems to be like it's just you. It's you and your neuroses and your stuff. You might have a better connection or more open connection with other forms of consciousness, but it's not to the degree that ayahuasca and psilocybin or DMT, any of these things. LSD for me is like a learning tool. It is therapeutic to an extent, but for the most part, I would use it to enhance neuroplasticity, which, by the way, it is the most effective or the most efficacious. It causes the most new growth in brain cells of all of the psychedelics, including DMT. So That's interesting because I wouldn't have expected that. I would have thought DMT would be the one. Ayahuasca is dealing a lot with trauma and emotional stuff. And I think it is able to dig down deeper and get to places that LSD is unable to reach. And also, I think it is more of a contact with a hyperdimensional other. I will talk a little bit about Pachamama here too, because, and this sometimes makes people angry, but it's not my fault that pop culture makes shit up. Sorry, I know this stuff because I've been researching ayahuasca since before it was trendy. So ideas that have been generated by the pop culture that never existed in any of the anthropological literature, or none of Terence McKenna's books, there's the Shipibo have always had the dieta. This is true, but it's not like you avoid meat. Pachamama, this is one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, that Pachamama wants people to be like vegan peacenik hippies or something. I mean, there are tribes here that used to shrink heads when they drank ayahuasca, and they would eat monkeys during the ceremony. They still do. So there's a lot of stuff that pop culture has come up with that. I mean, it's fine. I'm not saying don't observe the dieta or whatever. It's just what was the question again? I feel like I went off on a tangent. Oh, that's a good one. Dark entities. No, I have not. And I don't know that I believe in that. I think that it's oftentimes just an excuse. It's a, what do you call it? Not projection, but it's like a scapegoat, but no, I've that's the thing that really okay. Let me put it this way: in all of my studies of like Hermetic magic and the Western mystery tradition and consciousness, one of the things that I have become pretty confident in is that our will is sovereign, and nothing has the right, even if there are parasitic entities or dark entities, unless there is some reason for these things to become integrated into your being and processed, it's not going to happen. And I mean, when you say dark entities are attacking you when you smoke cannabis, it could be anxiety that you're personifying, or maybe, like a great shaman once told me, anything I say could be complete bullshit, but if you're asking my opinion, I have never once, from San Pedro, Wilca, ayahuasca, tobacco, the mushrooms, I have never had an entity that I have encountered, DMT, suggest to me to do anything that harmed anyone or myself. It has even occurred to me that it is possible that these spiritual entities do not die. They don't break their legs. They don't go broke. They have no concept of harm. You're talking about beings that you couldn't harm. They can't harm each other. What would they? How? What are they going to do? They're immaterial. If a voice in your head tells you to do something that is not cogent with your metaphysics and philosophical disposition, don't do it. You have a sovereign will, and nothing is going to put undue influence on you. Well, like I said, I mean, you can I would consider that well, I know people blame things on parasitic entities, but I would also suggest that there's a very, very strong demonstrable correlation between belief in parasitical entities and experiences of parasitical entities. So, and it's true that over the years, I'm trained in Hermetic magic, and I used to do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram twice a day for a long time. And, but, in my experience, the only time I ever had any kind of interaction with something that I considered a negative entity, it had nothing to do with psychedelics. And I'm not even sure that it was negative, because it just kind of like seemed to be provoking me to go to a dark place. And then when I didn't do it, it just reverted back to being this like helpful guide. And it very well could have been just that it was just demonstrating for me my own strength of conviction, and so and I'm not saying that I don't believe in them. I'm just saying that I haven't experienced it. And all of the information I've ever received from an entity, either with DMT or ayahuasca, has been true. Like if it was like a forecast about like this is gonna, like one time a DMT entity told me this specific relative is going to send you this specific amount of money. This was not something she had ever done before. I had not shown any signs of distress, and 5 minutes after the DMT entity vanished, my phone beeped, and it was that relative, that amount of money. And I mentioned Pachamama telling me about, this girl will have your babies, and that was true. And there's a number of them. I made a video you can check out. I'm sure you can. DMT entity, synchronicity, and prophecy, I think it's called, where I talk about this. But never have I received a piece of information that didn't turn out to be true, and nothing has ever said to me, go kill yourself, or wait a minute, that's not true. One mushroom experience that I had, now that I think about it, it was like this voice was like calling me into the bathroom, and I started having one of these visions of like this black energy and like blood draining, like I should like slit my wrists in the tub and bleed out. And but I didn't actually feel tempted to do any of it. And then I died in the bed, and my girlfriend later told me that I was actually cold to the touch. And the moment, and it was the most horrible feeling I've ever experienced. It was like actual death. But the moment the sun broke over the mountains, I was filled with air, like I could breathe again, and it was like I had been reborn. So I did not associate the impulse to suicide, which I didn't seriously consider at any time, to be the result of the influence of a parasitical entity. I just interpreted it as part of this process of what was perhaps an ego death experience, or something along those lines. Okay, so bullet point here. We are all one consciousness divided in order to experience union. The universe is only here to experience itself. And we are avatars of the consciousness that it uses to do this, or we're part of that. And because the net of consciousness is one, I mean, we know from physics that all energy is entangled fundamentally and responds instantly, regardless of the distance, which even suggests that everything is actually all in one place, right? And so when we take a plant medicine like ayahuasca and we heal our traumas, we are not only healing ourselves in the present, we are healing our future lineage. My son will not be subjected to the influences of the abuse that affected my mother, because it has stopped with me, and in large part due to the ayahuasca. And there are so many levels of benefit, the changes in the brain that facilitate higher cognition. We are able to make a conscious decision that we are going to accelerate our evolutionary process and we are able to even determine to an extent what that is going to look like. And so when one unit of consciousness, since it's all connected, frees itself, cuts these sandbags of trauma and bullshit, and also, this brain development and higher cognitive stuff that's happening, right? And the ascension of consciousness, when your balloon takes off, it pulls the entire net with it. So even the work that you do individually affects potentially really the entire universe instantly. And, that could be maybe a frightening thing to consider because it puts a tremendous amount of weight on all of our shoulders, but that's what we need. We need to walk with knowledge wisely, to ascend and to carry the rest of humanity with us. And it works. It works on a number of levels. So thank you guys so much for watching tonight. The last 2 Tuesdays, I was going to do this. We're going to talk about religion and the impact on the United States. And the last 2 Tuesdays, I was too sick somehow both Tuesdays. So this will be the 3rd time I've rescheduled that live stream. So hopefully I'll see you guys then. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Good night.